The supermarket hummed with the everyday rhythm of life. Shopping carts rattled across tiled floors, cashiers called out totals in practiced voices, and fluorescent lights glared overhead with a brightness that felt almost harsh. It was the kind of place where people rushed in, grabbed what they needed, and rushed out again without giving much thought to the quiet lives unfolding beside them. In that sea of routine, a story was about to begin, one that would change two lives forever. Emily stood in the baby formula aisle, her thin frame wrapped in a sweater that had lost its warmth long ago. The fabric sagged at the elbows, stretched from years of use, and did little to shield her from the invisible weight pressing down on her shoulders. Her eyes, shadowed by exhaustion, scanned the rows of brightly labeled cans that promised nourishment and strength. To the casual observer, she might have looked like just another tired mother picking up groceries. But beneath that image was a battle invisible to everyone else. She adjusted her infant, cradled against her chest in a faded blanket. The baby stirred softly, tiny fists poking through the worn fabric, and Emily's hand instinctively patted the child's back. At her side, her daughter tugged gently at her sweater. "Mommy, can we go home soon?" the little girl whispered, her voice laced with innocence and impatience. Emily forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart." Her hand trembled as it reached for a can of formula. The price tag stared back at her like a cruel joke. For a moment, she let herself imagine buying it, the relief of knowing her baby's needs were met, the comfort of feeding without worry. Hope flickered in her eyes. But when she opened her wallet, reality struck harder than any blow. Crumpled bills stared back at her, barely enough for bread, diapers, and maybe a few vegetables. Certainly not enough for formula. Her breath hitched. Slowly, reluctantly, she placed the can back on the shelf. That simple motion carried the weight of a storm, of sacrifice, of resignation, of a mother forced to choose survival over comfort. To her, it wasn't just a can of milk. It was a symbol of everything she could not give. What Emily didn't know was that she wasn't alone in that aisle. Just a few feet away, a man had paused in his stride. His tailored black suit and polished shoes marked him as someone out of place in the hum of ordinary shoppers. He had walked in for nothing more than a bottle of water before his next meeting, but now, he found himself unable to move. Jonathan watched the scene unfold. He was a man whose name appeared in business journals, whose fortune was whispered about in high circles. Yet as he saw Emily lower her head and turn away from the formula aisle, something inside him shifted. All his wealth, his achievements, his acquisitions, none of it seemed to matter against the sight of a mother's quiet defeat. For a long moment he simply stood there, trying to understand the knot forming in his chest. He was used to seeing problems as transactions to be solved. Struggling families, struggling businesses, numbers on a page. But here in front of him was something raw, human, and unpolished. It wasn't a report or a headline. It was a woman, her 2 children, and the kind of pain that couldn't be quantified. Emily moved on, carefully choosing the cheapest essentials. A loaf of bread. Discounted vegetables. Diapers, after what seemed like endless hesitation. Every choice was weighed like gold. Jonathan followed at a distance, not out of curiosity but out of something deeper, an urge he couldn't quite name. Each time Emily reached for an item, counted her bills, or sighed quietly, Jonathan felt the walls around his carefully guarded life start to crack. When she reached the checkout, her anxiety became more visible. She counted her money twice, then looked at the cashier with an apologetic smile, as if embarrassed for not having enough. The baby in her arms whimpered, and Emily whispered soft words of comfort that were more soothing than any lullaby. Her daughter clutched her sweater, wide eyes watching as the groceries were scanned. Jonathan pretended to browse the candy rack, but his mind was racing. For years he had lived by ruthless decisions, buy, sell, expand. That was his world. But now, none of those victories stirred his heart the way this moment did. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profit margins or market shares. He was thinking about what it meant to be human. Emily gathered her groceries and walked out into the daylight. The sun painted long shadows across the parking lot as she balanced her crying baby in one arm and guided her daughter with the other. Her car, a worn sedan with peeling paint, stood as another reminder of a life stretched too thin. She loaded her groceries with care, as though even the cheapest bread deserved respect. Jonathan followed slowly, his steps steady but heavy with thought. He could have walked away. He could have told himself that it wasn't his problem. But the image of Emily placing that can back on the shelf refused to leave his mind. For once, he understood that wealth was more than privilege, it was responsibility. He tightened his grip on the water bottle he had bought, then loosened it again, realizing it no longer mattered. What mattered was the decision he was about to make. He wasn't sure how Emily would react. He wasn't even sure what he would say. But deep down, Jonathan knew this moment would define him more than any deal he had ever closed. And with that, he stepped forward, ready to change not only Emily's life, but his own. Emily shut the trunk of her battered sedan, the metallic thud echoing through the parking lot. Her daughter had already climbed into the back seat, humming softly as she strapped herself in. The baby whimpered again, his tiny cries cutting through the summer air. Emily kissed his forehead and whispered, "It's okay, my love. Mommy will figure it out." She turned to open the driver's door when a voice, deep yet gentle, called out, "Excuse me." Startled, Emily's grip tightened on the door handle. Her first instinct was caution. Life had trained her to be wary of strangers, especially men in expensive suits who didn't seem to belong in her world. Slowly she turned, her tired eyes meeting the gaze of Jonathan. He offered a small, disarming smile. "I'm sorry if I startled you. I saw you inside the store." He paused, searching for the right words. "And I couldn't just walk away." Emily's defenses rose instantly. Pride, her last shield, stood tall. "Look, if this is about charity." Jonathan raised his hands gently. "No, not charity. Kindness." His tone carried no pity, only sincerity. "I saw you put back the baby formula. I don't know your story, but I do know what it feels like to watch someone you love need something and feel helpless." Emily's heart clenched. She hated being exposed, her private struggle witnessed. Yet there was something in Jonathan's eyes, not judgment, not superiority, but a raw compassion that unsettled her. "I can't accept handouts," she whispered, shaking her head. Jonathan stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "This isn't about handouts. It's about humanity. Let me do this, just this once." Before she could protest, he lifted a bag from behind his back. Inside was the very can of formula she had placed back on the shelf, along with a few extra items, fruits, cereal, even a small box of chocolates. Emily's breath caught. Her eyes darted from the bag to Jonathan, torn between resistance and relief. Her pride screamed to refuse. But then her baby cried again, a weak, hungry sound that pierced through her hesitation. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the edges of Jonathan's face. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice breaking. "Why would you help me?" Jonathan swallowed, his jaw tightening. "Because I can. And because no child should go without. Sometimes the universe puts us in the right place at the right time. Today it put me here." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Finally, Emily reached out, her hand trembling as she accepted the bag. "Thank you," she whispered, the words tasting unfamiliar, heavy with both gratitude and vulnerability. Jonathan nodded. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll let yourself accept help when you need it." Emily clutched the bag to her chest, overwhelmed. For years she had carried her burdens alone, convinced no one cared. To have someone, a stranger, step in with such sincerity shook the walls she had built around her heart. As she opened the car door, Jonathan hesitated. "Wait." He pulled a card from his pocket, extending it toward her. "If you ever need more than groceries, if you ever need someone to call, use this." Emily's eyes narrowed. She wanted to reject it, to avoid entanglements with people she didn't understand. But something in his tone made her pause. He wasn't offering control. He wasn't demanding anything. He was simply leaving a lifeline. Slowly she took the card, slipping it into her wallet without looking at it. Jonathan smiled faintly, then stepped back. "Take care, Emily." Her head snapped up. "How do you know my name?" His expression softened. "The cashier said it when you paid. That's all." With that, he turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement until he disappeared into the crowd. Emily sat in her car, staring at the formula tin resting in the bag beside her. A lump formed in her throat. For the first time in months, she felt the crushing weight of despair lighten just a little. A stranger had seen her, truly seen her, and instead of looking away, he had reached out. She drove home in silence, her daughter eventually drifting to sleep in the back seat, her baby finally soothed by the promise of nourishment. But Emily's thoughts stayed tangled around that man in the suit. Who was he really? Why had he cared? And what did it mean for the fragile world she was holding together? Jonathan, meanwhile, stood outside the supermarket, watching her car disappear. His chest felt tight, his mind racing. He had done countless business deals worth millions, but none of them had left him with this sense of significance. The image of Emily putting that can back on the shelf replayed in his mind, carving itself deeper each time. For years, he had built his fortune with precision, strategy, and ambition. He owned properties, companies, entire portfolios. He was respected in boardrooms, envied by competitors, and admired by strangers who knew nothing of the emptiness he carried inside. But all the power in the world hadn't given him what this small act of kindness had just stirred, a sense of connection. He thought of his childhood, of nights when his mother had gone hungry so he could eat. Jonathan rarely let himself revisit those memories, but now they came rushing back, raw and unfiltered. He had promised himself back then that he would never feel powerless again. He had built an empire to protect himself from scarcity. But in doing so, he had forgotten what it meant to use his wealth for more than comfort. Tonight he knew he wouldn't sleep. Not because of regret, but because of awakening. He had taken one step toward something greater than himself, and he could not stop there. At home, Emily unpacked her meager groceries in her small kitchen. The cracked tiles and flickering light bulbs seemed less oppressive tonight. She set the can of formula on the counter, staring at it as though it were a miracle. Her daughter skipped into the room, excitement lighting her face. "Mommy, we have chocolate," she exclaimed, holding up the small box. Emily's eyes filled again, but this time with tears of gratitude. She pulled her daughter close and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. We have chocolate." For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope that tomorrow might be different. She didn't yet know that this encounter was only the beginning, that the man who had appeared in her life so suddenly would become more than a stranger. He would become the reason she learned to dream again. The next morning, Emily sat at the small wooden table in her cramped kitchen. The can of baby formula rested nearby, its bright label standing out against the dull counters. She measured the powder carefully into a bottle, added warm water, and shook it gently until the mixture swirled into a pale liquid. Her baby's hungry cries filled the room, but this time, instead of anxiety gnawing at her, Emily felt a fragile sense of relief. As she held the bottle to her infant's lips, tears pricked her eyes. The child drank eagerly, his tiny hands clutching the bottle as if it were salvation. Emily stroked his cheek, whispering, "You'll be okay now, sweetheart." Her daughter skipped into the kitchen, clutching a crayon drawing. "Mommy, look. Just you, me, and baby." She held up the paper proudly, 3 stick figures standing beneath a sun that smiled too brightly. Emily kissed her daughter's head, her heart aching with both love and guilt. She wanted to give them everything, a safe home, security, joy. But every day was a balancing act, survival hanging by a thread. That stranger's kindness had given her one day of peace. But what about tomorrow? Her eyes drifted toward her wallet, where Jonathan's business card lay hidden between folded receipts. She hadn't even glanced at it closely. Part of her feared what it represented. Accepting help from a stranger meant opening herself up, risking disappointment or worse, dependency. For now she pushed the thought aside. There was work to do. Jonathan, on the other hand, couldn't shake Emily from his mind. He sat in his office, a glass tower overlooking the city skyline. Papers cluttered his mahogany desk, contracts waiting for his signature, numbers scrolling across his laptop screen. Deals worth millions demanded his attention. Yet his thoughts wandered back to the supermarket aisle, to the haunted look in Emily's eyes. His assistant knocked gently. "Mr. Reynolds, the investors are waiting on your approval for the merger." Jonathan waved absently. "Tell them they'll have it by the end of the day." The assistant hesitated. Jonathan Reynolds never delayed decisions. His sharp efficiency was legendary. But today his mind wasn't on profit margins. It was on a woman who had taught him, without meaning to, that wealth meant little if it couldn't ease suffering. Finally, unable to focus, Jonathan leaned back in his chair and picked up his phone. He dialed a number, one of his company managers. "I need you to check something for me. Are there any job openings in our community outreach division? Something steady but flexible?" The manager sounded surprised. "Yes, actually, we've been looking for additional administrative support." "Why?" Jonathan didn't answer directly. "Send me the details. I may have someone in mind." When he hung up, he exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure if Emily would accept. He wasn't even sure if she'd call. But he knew one thing. He had been given a chance to make a difference and he couldn't ignore it. That evening, Emily's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity nudged her. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Emily? It's Jonathan. From the supermarket." Her grip on the phone tightened. She hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. "Oh, hello. I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to check if you and your children are okay." His voice was calm, respectful, with none of the arrogance she had expected from a man in a suit. Emily hesitated. Pride urged her to say she was fine, but honesty slipped out instead. "We're managing. Thank you again for what you did yesterday." Jonathan paused. "I didn't call for thanks. I wanted to offer something more. I know you've been struggling. I might be able to help you find steady work. Nothing overwhelming, just something reliable that could make things easier." Emily's chest tightened. She didn't like the idea of appearing needy, yet the thought of consistent income was tempting. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." Jonathan's answer was simple. "Because I believe in second chances. And because sometimes we're put in each other's paths for a reason." Emily swallowed hard, torn between fear and hope. I don't know. I'd need to think about it." "Of course," Jonathan said warmly. "No pressure. I'll send you the details and the choice is yours. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it." When she hung up, Emily stared at the phone for a long time. Part of her wanted to toss the card away and forget. But another part whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the lifeline she had been waiting for. Days passed. Emily worked her night shift at the diner, her body aching from exhaustion. She cleaned houses during the day, her hands raw from scrubbing. Yet through the fatigue, her thoughts kept circling back to Jonathan's offer. Was it possible he truly wanted to help without expecting anything in return? Her daughter's laughter, bright and innocent, finally pushed her toward a decision. Emily wanted more than survival. She wanted her children to have stability, to feel safe. And if this stranger's offer could open that door, wasn't it worth at least trying? So one morning, with trembling hands, Emily called the number Jonathan had given her. "Mr. Reynolds?" "It's Emily." Jonathan's voice lit with relief. "Emily, I'm glad you called." And so began the first steps of a transformation neither of them had fully imagined. Jonathan arranged everything discreetly. Emily was hired into an administrative support role at one of his companies. The pay was modest by his standards but life-changing for her. The hours were flexible enough for childcare, and the work environment was safe. Emily walked into her first day nervous, but as she sat at a clean desk with a computer and organized files, she felt something stir inside her: dignity. Weeks turned into months. Emily settled into her new job, balancing work and motherhood with a strength that amazed even herself. Bills no longer loomed like monsters at the end of the month. She could buy formula, diapers, and even small treats without counting every coin twice. But perhaps the greatest change was within Emily herself. She no longer felt invisible. For the first time since her husband's death, she allowed herself to dream beyond mere survival. Jonathan visited occasionally, not as her boss but as a friend. He checked in on the children, bringing small gifts, a toy for her daughter, fresh fruit for the baby. Each time, Emily's guard lowered a little more. She saw that his kindness wasn't fleeting. It was consistent, steady, and without expectation. One evening, Emily found herself laughing with him over coffee at her kitchen table. The sound startled her. It had been so long since laughter felt natural. Jonathan smiled, watching her. "You have no idea how strong you are, do you?" Emily shook her head, embarrassed. "Strong? I've barely held things together." Jonathan leaned forward. "Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking and still choosing to stand again. That's what I see in you." His words sank deep, planting a seed of hope Emily hadn't dared to nurture in years. Autumn leaves drifted across the quiet neighborhood street as Emily stepped onto the porch of her modest new home. The house was nothing extravagant, but it was warm, safe, and filled with laughter. Her daughter raced across the yard, chasing falling leaves, while the baby gurgled happily in a playpen by the steps. Emily leaned against the railing, a mug of tea warming her hands. For years she had lived under the shadow of fear of unpaid bills, of eviction, of not having enough to feed her children. But now, for the first time since her husband's death, the horizon looked different. It was no longer a storm. It was a dawn. Jonathan's car pulled up quietly. He stepped out, his usual sharp suit replaced by a casual sweater and jeans. Emily smiled faintly, surprised at how natural his visits had become. "You're early," she teased lightly. He shrugged. "I had some time. Thought I'd see how my favorite family is doing." Emily laughed, shaking her head. "We're hardly that interesting." Jonathan's gaze softened. "You'd be surprised." He joined her on the porch, watching the children. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was comfortable, like two people who understood each other without needing constant words. After a while, Emily spoke. "I still don't understand why you helped me. You could have ignored me, gone on with your life." Jonathan's expression grew thoughtful. "Because I was losing myself, Emily. I had everything people dream of: money, power, recognition. But I had forgotten what it meant to live for more than myself. That day in the supermarket, it reminded me of my mother. She sacrificed everything so I could have a chance. When I saw you put that formula back, I realized I couldn't just watch. I had to act. Emily swallowed, her throat tightening. You changed everything for us. He shook his head. No. You changed everything for yourself. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it. Her eyes glistened. She looked out at her daughter, laughing freely, and her son, growing stronger every day. Sometimes I think about how close I was to giving up. If you hadn't been there. Jonathan interrupted gently. Fate put us in each other's path for a reason. Maybe you needed help, but maybe I needed you too. The words lingered in the air, warm and honest. Emily felt her heart shift in a way she hadn't expected. This man wasn't just a benefactor anymore. He had become a friend, a constant presence, and perhaps something more she wasn't yet ready to name. Weeks passed and Jonathan's bond with Emily's children grew. He would kneel in the grass, helping her daughter build leaf forts, or cradle the baby with surprising gentleness. The children adored him, their laughter louder when he was around. For Emily it was both comforting and frightening. She had promised herself never to depend on anyone again. Yet here was Jonathan, not asking for her dependence but quietly earning her trust. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold, Emily watched Jonathan lift her daughter into the air, both of them laughing freely. The scene struck her with such force that her eyes filled with tears. Not of sorrow but of gratitude. She realized then that Jonathan hadn't just changed her circumstances. He had reminded her that love, in all its forms, still existed. That kindness could rebuild not just homes but hearts. Months later, Emily sat at her desk at work, sorting through documents. She was no longer the woman who counted every coin in despair. She was capable, confident, and respected. Her colleagues admired her diligence, though few knew the hardships she had endured to get there. At lunch, Jonathan stopped by her office with his usual easy smile. I was in the building. Thought I'd see how my best hire is doing. Emily rolled her eyes playfully. I'm hardly your best hire. Maybe not on paper, he said, leaning against the doorway. But in spirit? Absolutely. Her cheeks warmed at his words. She lowered her gaze, smiling despite herself. That night, back at home, Emily tucked her children into bed. She lingered at the doorway, watching them sleep peacefully. The baby stirred but quickly settled again, his cheeks rosy and full. Her daughter clutched a small stuffed bear Jonathan had given her, smiling even in her dreams. Emily stepped outside onto the porch, the cool night air brushing her skin. Jonathan joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. They sat in silence, the stars scattered above them. Finally, Emily whispered, You know, I used to think kindness was a luxury the world couldn't afford. Now I know it's the only thing that makes life worth living. Jonathan smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Then I guess we've both learned something. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the hum of crickets and the steady rhythm of their breathing, Emily realized the greatest wealth wasn't in possessions or numbers. It was in connection, in compassion, in the courage to care. Jonathan had given her more than help. He had given her back her hope. And she, without realizing it, had given him back his heart.